My company is Millersoft. We're based down in Musselburgh. We've been operating with open source software for about 20 years in financial systems, logistics systems, credit checking systems. So I'm just here to share some of that experience with you about open source software, and also basically sell some of the best open source software on the market that perhaps you would consider using in financial systems. So just a few thoughts, a bit like the previous presenter, on why we're involved in open source. Personally, the key thing for me is it's long-running conversations. I mean, I did a lot of work, probably like most of you, subcontracting, going around various institutions, banks, etc. And when you were with your work colleagues, you know, when the project ends, a lot of the time the conversations end as well. But that tends not to happen with open source software. You know, these projects can be long-running projects, particularly if you're involved in, you know, the Apache open source projects. They can be running for years and years. And the people involved are hugely passionate. They'll drift in, they'll drift back out of those projects, but you know the conversations will keep running. And I've got people that I still keep in contact in open source from 20 years ago, and it's great because they built up their experiences, I built up my experiences, and we tend to share best practice. The market access is actually quite interesting. You know, you could be in the middle of an Apache open source project, you know, minding your own business, and then suddenly you'll get a call from a huge company. You know, you added a feature which is critical to their needs, and they would like a little bit of support around it. So that kind of thing happened to me with Skype. I was involved in an OLAP, online analytical processing application, which is open source, and Skype were using it for doing their analysis, their telephony analysis. This is long before Microsoft bought them. And they picked up, asked for support, and then the American company that commercialised that software called Pentaho, they asked us to be their partner in the UK, and we were the longest running Pentaho partner in the UK. And that opened so many doors for us and people with people in the Pentaho community and people who were using that OLAP engine. So, you know, it can open doors, open source, there's no doubt about it. Edinburgh's quite a mature financial market. You know, you try and sell financial software into the Edinburgh market, and it's quite tough. You know, hats off to Scott Logic for actually doing that. You might find it easier, you know, commercialising or supporting one of the existing open source packages which the financial institutions are actually using, but are very short in skills on. You know, you could provide training around that, you could provide adaptations around that, and that gets you through the door, which you may find quite difficult as a startup. So again, the previous speaker covered this sort of learning from peers. When you're involved in some of the big open source projects, you're picking up fantastic experience from some of the top developers in the world, and how to use test-driven development, how to use patterning, how to build at scale, how to build the software using the latest technology as well. So you're picking all that up in the open source community. So the cloud's interesting. You know, we've all come from an environment where we started off doing, you know, machine code and moved to languages. Then it was application servers, and now we're moving into a cloud environment. And you might think, well, what's the relevance of open source when you're dealing with people like Amazon Cloud, when you're dealing with Google, when you're dealing with Microsoft? But when you look at some of these technologies, now being an Amazon partner, when you look at some of these technologies like Amazon Athena, well, Amazon Athena is based around Presto, which is an open source project which Facebook open sourced, and Amazon have adapted it for their stack. But if you were aware of Presto before Amazon, then you know you've got a head start in the market, you know, with this kit. Similarly, another big database software produced by Amazon is Amazon. What was their database software? The name escapes me, but it's all based around Postgres. You know, and Postgres are very common open source software. So you know, you'll find a lot of these stacks and a lot of these big organisations are commercial adaptations of open source projects because they're license free and they can scale them out. So it gives you a route into the innards of the cloud. And creative integration as well. I mean, one of the new marketplaces is for business software. Companies, banks are moving their data into the cloud. They're moving it into data lakes in the cloud, they're moving it into data warehouses in the cloud. But the cloud providers like AWS are actually opening up marketplaces. So you could never tap these businesses and their data previously, but you could actually build applications that run in these marketplaces and have them running in corporate applications, corporate environments. And there's obviously a trust issue there in getting your software in there. And if they can see it via open source, it's an easier way of moving your applications into the market. And also, if you're building it on top of open source, you're not starting from scratch. You know, you're near the finishing line if you're building your applications on quality open source software. And just finally on, you know, open source is the key. It encourages cooperation, and that's key in Edinburgh. And James touched on that. If you're involved in finance, you can see the millions of pounds that are being spent on IRFS 9, on MiFID 2, on GDPR, all the buzzwords. Every single banking institution is spending millions of pounds meeting this regulation, and it's forcing the smaller players out because they can't afford to build it from scratch. And there's very little cooperation around that software. And if the financial open source community can create a market around that where these ideas are shared, because it's not core business. You know, a lot of this regulatory reporting, they all just have to do it. You know, it's not core business. If Finos can actually create a market around that, then it gives yourselves, an opportunity to have a foot into that market. So open source for me is a key. So I'm going to introduce a technology stack here. Again, it's not our own stack. Linux, Pentaho Kettle, Apache Druid, Apache Superset, Allegro. I'm going to touch on them all briefly because it is a flash talk. I'm going to whiz through it and hopefully take some questions at the end. It's built around a payment processing system just to make it interesting. But all I'm trying to do is get you to try and investigate these open source projects yourselves and hopefully use them in your work environment. So we'll start off. This is with Pentaho Data Integration. It's a Swiss Army knife for moving data around your organizations, in and out the cloud, in and out of databases. It does template-driven ETL, and there's a sort of plugin marketplace which you can develop applications for, and there's a huge active open source community, which have some great meetings in the continent. So I'm going to demo that. We're going to have a look at Apache Superset. This is basically an open source dashboarding and reporting analytics framework, which hopefully you'll pick up and adopt and start using it for perhaps operational analysis in your environments, and then move on for doing perhaps regulatory reporting with. Apache Druid as well. I don't know if any of you have ever used column-based databases in the past. They're basically big fat spreadsheets which allow you to pivot data. Apache Druid is a pivot table on steroids. I mean, it will allow you to pivot terabytes, petabytes of data at monster scale. It's free, it's open source. It allows you to have an SQL access in there. There's a REST interface to it as well. It's fantastic at things like streaming analytics. If you're building financial APIs and you're wondering what the flow of data through your APIs is, stick that data into Druid. It will compress it, it will do pre-aggregations on it, and the performance will be absolutely phenomenal. Use cases for Apache Druid: telemetry, application monitoring, quality of service. Oh, sorry, just jump back there. Oh. Yeah, funnel analysis, usage patterns, A to B testing, content targeting, user segmentation and marketing, conversion and click rates, etc., etc. All that stuff is great. What we're currently working on is anomaly detection. You pump your data through Druid. There's another open source technology called Sherlock, and it'll look, because Druid's focused on time series analytics, it'll look at peaks and troughs of your data over time, and then you can set up alerts. So it will come back to you and say, if there's something wrong in that wave, go and have a look at that data. Yeah? So it does all sorts of clever stuff. And a bit like Pentaho, there's also a plugin environment for it. So you can build plugins for Druid. So Druid might make you no money, but one of the financial institutions in Edinburgh will pick up Druid, and you may have some fancy plugins which you think are appropriate to the banking market. It was a much easier sell to get those into the Druid infrastructure, and then you can support that for the bank. I'm going to show you a really nice open source package which is built by a a Polish company called Allegro, and that gives you the visual pivot table aspects of Druid. Again, because it's hooked into Druid, it'll do analysis at a massive scale. It'll allow you to drill down to the raw level transactions, and you can do all sorts of smart time series and analytics on it. Appreciate I'm running out of time. There's a stack I'm going to show you. Bit of a live demo. Come out with that and show. Come on, come on. So I'm just going to try and pick up on Kettle. Any familiar with Kettle or using any other ETL tools? Nope. Right, ETL is extraction, transfer, and load. So this could be your operational system, or it could be Apache Kafka queues. So you could have your raw data flowing through here. But what we're essentially trying to do at the end is produce a text file of all the information that we need for payment processing. So we're building a payment processing system, but obviously we can't show you live payment processing data. But this little piece of ETL will allow you to build dummy test data for payment processing. I'll just show you a couple of steps. These are sort of plugins that I was telling you about. So this will generate random credit card numbers, for example. So we're going to generate random Visa numbers, generate random MasterCard numbers, and then the top line generates actual payments as we go through. It can be, if you generate random data, it can be quite boring when you try and visualize it. So there's a sort of programmatic step here, and there's all sorts of fancy maths going on here to get graphs which are showing some curves, etc. So yeah, you can use that. This is one small application area of Kettle just to generate some payment data. So this is a file. If I can hit cancel.
You've got a dialog box.
This is the application that we're using to open source application. This is Apache licensed. This is what we're using to generate the payments data. So that ends up in Druid. I can come out here. I'll jump to the website. Druid has an interface, a web interface here. It's just running on a port of one of our Amazon servers. So if you go to data sources, you can see we've got a variety of data sources in here. This is the cube flat file we're going to use. If we just go to the SQL, we can just generate some fancy SQL statement to show you the data that was coming out of the tool. This is coming out the Kettle tool. And is it enriched cube? There we go. So there we go. If you run this, this is the data set. Oh, something wrong.
You're from.
I was just testing. You'll see a few deliberate mistakes in here. Make sure you're all watching. Right, so that's the data that was in the Kettle ETL tool, and that's now sitting up inside Druid. So we can actually query that. One of the great things about Druid is it's got an SQL interface, but it's also got a REST interface as well. So if you're building dashboards on top of a REST interface and you've got reports which are using an SQL interface, the figures will tie up, which is not always the case if you've got different information in different places. Yeah? So this is the data in Druid. Very quickly jump to Superset. We built a dashboard in Superset 5 hours ago, and that's going to generate how nice do these look out of Superset. This will generate a dashboard based on number of transactions this year, number of transactions this month, some sort of core KPIs. You can see some really nice graphs in here. Monthly transactions, amounts, yearly comparison. You can see some differences here between this year and last year. There's a table showing payment systems and the numbers of cards, statuses which are authorised, refunded, refused. This is showing the flow from two businesses to different payment gateways. Yeah. Nice sort of filtering interface at the top here. Yeah. That's showing different companies that we've mocked up the payment data against. But you can build all that. That took sort of 3 hours. Well, actually, it took about an hour. One of our developers this afternoon. But that sort of shows you the quality of the dashboard that you can build with free and open source software. And this is all on a URL. You can distribute that around your organisation. Yeah. Really quite nice. Now the last piece of technology I'm just going to show you is the same data and inside Turnilo. If you've used Excel pivot tables, you'll get the idea. You stuff a whole lot of data into a wide table, then you can splice and dice it. The problem with Excel is that you're limited to about 1 million records. If you hook Turnilo up to Druid, there's no limit either to the number of rows that you're allowed to process or to the width. So a lot of banks do a lot of profiling, whether it's credit profile analysis or just customer profile analysis. And you could get, you can get hundreds of profile points per customer. And as these stretch out, the capabilities of modern databases start to pair off. Not so with Druid. So we choose our sample cube. So you can see here, you've got a really nice payment style interface. You've got your dimensions here. You've got your measures here. Just scroll up. And then you've got a nice sort of splice and dice interface. The default isn't that interesting. So we'll just take transaction count, take the rates off, take the amounts off, take the action count off, and then we'll try, actually maybe try throwing in the payment type. So payment status. I can try the split. All right, so we've got a nice table here, payments. And if we pull over, that's just showing you the latest day. If we flip that over and just show, right, we want just basically see a year's worth of data. Hit OK. Not too interesting. If we switch that to adding in the time, and then perhaps switch it over to a graph. There we go. So we're graphing transaction count over the split dimensions, which is payment status. Yeah, and then we've got nice sort of filters over on the right-hand side. So we've never had to program any of this. Yeah, we just basically point it at the fact table in Druid. It reverse engineers what the dimensions are. It reverse engineers what the measures are, and then all of a sudden you can query this data at massive scale. Yeah, so that's the beauty of utilizing tools like Turnilo. Turnilo's up on GitHub. You can download and get it up and running in minutes. It's even got like a non-Druid test framework which you can use with it. Okay. Appreciate that was a whistle-stop tour. I think my time's probably more than up. Happy to take any questions if there's any further time left.
Yeah, I'll ask for a couple of questions.
Any questions?
Hey.
Nope.
For the dashboards, what level of skill do you need? You mentioned that one of your developers took an hour to spin that up. So do you need to be a developer to do that? Or
No, superset. All you need is SQL. Basically, and there's a graphical way of building your SQL statements up there. So that's basically it. Any more questions? Cool. Thanks for your time.